Good morning. We're here to discuss Silicon Valley real estate market geographically and then also the Greater Bay Area, which includes 13 counties. It's week number 15. We'll come back to this slide for an explanation at slide 57. I'm Richard Calhoun, Creekside Realty, 40 years of working with buyers or sellers here in Silicon Valley. Here's the first map. It's showing days of unsold inventory. Days of unsold inventory is the key indicator. It's the supply-demand ratio. It's how long it would take to sell the existing inventory at the existing rate of sale. You can see these numbers are pretty aggressive. The two exceptions on that are the San Mateo, Santa Clara County border in San Mateo, basically the expensive areas, Menlo Park, Atherton, Woodside, Portola Valley, and Foster City. Foster City, Redwood Shores is a very small micro market, so it tends to fluctuate quite a bit. The rest of these areas are between about 12, a dozen days of unsold inventory, and about 50, with the bulk of them being in the 12 to 25 range. Here's a chart that goes back in time. You can see that the beginning part of the year, we were much paler. We were mostly white or pale pink, and then we got fairly red fairly quickly, and then we went on. Alameda County is missing prior to the beginning of February. This is days on market, the 75th percentile. So this is what I call the long end of the normal seller. So a seller that's serious about selling but isn't being successful is typically going to be the 75th percentile. Only 25% of the sellers are taking longer than this to sell. And most of these days are way under 2 weeks. And when I say way under, it's not way under because it's hard to get below a week on the marketplace. So when you're talking days like this at 10 days, 11 days, that even though it's only 4 and 3 days under 2 weeks, it's significantly under. You can see there's a couple up here at 13. There's one here, the North San Mateo County area at 15, just a day above. You go saturated red at 7. So basically you can't get below 7 in my opinion. We have had a 5.6, but real rare. But for a seller to take 30 days to sell their property is not unreasonable, and that's not the typical seller. That's the seller that's taking sort of on the long side of normal, the 75th percentile. This is the average price reduction. This is asking price reduction. So this is sellers reducing their asking price prior to the offer coming in. When a seller goes on the market, they pick a price. If the market rejects them, then the seller has to make adjustments, and sometimes that's price. But you can see a lot of the areas are at 100%. The slowest area is the San Mateo County coast at 89%. Sellers typically don't reduce their price much in a large extent because they've done a fair amount of research before putting their property on the market. So they go on what they think is market value, and it's not too often that you miss the market by more than about 5%. Sometimes a seller wants to test the market or has other expectations. In those cases, there are price adjustments. Here's the overbid. So this is the difference between what the seller's asking at the time the offer comes in and what the buyer actually offers to try to secure the property. You can see almost every area that's above 100%. The only area that is not, again, is expensive areas in San Mateo County. We're at 98%. The hottest area is down here in Alameda, Berkeley, which shows up at the very top corner of the map right here. This pink here is actually the Oakland airport. So that's the Oakland area, even though most of the city of Oakland isn't shown on the map. And then from there, you get into southern Alameda County and San Mateo County, and then finally down in the South Bay, the Santa Clara County. Most of the area is a shade of pink or white. White is from 100 to 101.5%. So when a seller's getting just over their asking price, there's no color assigned. This now is looking at the frequency of overbidding. How common is it to have an overbid? And, this might surprise some people. Right now in Cupertino, Sunnyvale, 70% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. In a good portion of Santa Clara County, 2/3 of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. And I'm not seeing any area other than below 45% other than Palo Alto, just on the Santa Clara County side of that San Mateo, Santa Clara County border. You go up into San Mateo County and they have, again, the worst hit area, the area that's doing the least well at the moment. The expensive areas in San Mateo County at 73%. Almost a quarter of the sellers are getting more than their asking price in one of the least well-performing areas. This is the appreciation since the last 9 months of 2015. You can see it's more the outlying areas that are done well. I believe that's directly related to the pandemic. The areas that are doing the least well are the areas that are close to the job centers. This now is a sold price. Most people follow just the median price, which is the middle number shown in thousands. So that'd be 1.2 million for South County. The number to the left is the cheapest 10% in that geographical area. The number to the right is the most expensive 90% price in that area. You can see as you basically go east and south, the prices become more affordable. The west part of Silicon Valley is the sort of the highest concentration of red. The median tends to be right up here in Redwood City or the San Mateo County Bay cities. And that is an interesting observation. See, now the Bay cities are basically 2.2 million, with Redwood City 1.6 million. For a good part earlier this year, Redwood City was actually selling for more than San Mateo County Bay cities. That's a little bit of a change, but this is the more normal pattern. And Redwood City is typically the median, and that's why it's white. And then the Bay cities has got a shade of pink, and basically it's almost as pink as Cupertino Sunnyvale. So Cupertino Sunnyvale is at 2.6 million, so that's obviously more expensive and therefore the darker shade of red. Here's a summary of what we've gone over, so you can look at whatever micro market over area you're interested in over here within Silicon Valley. You can look at days unsold inventory. I still maintain that's one of the key indexes, because if it's taking you 151 days to sell the properties, the prices are not going to be going up. That to me tells you the future of the marketplace. This to me is more relevant. It's easier for the consumer to understand. And, it's also important to pay attention that the numbers don't necessarily agree. For example, in San Mateo County Coast, you would sell out all your inventory in 51 days, but the 75th percentile is taking 96 days. So that means some sellers are coming on the market and really struggling to sell their property, because no seller wants to be on the market for 3 months. But again, you can see most of these areas are under 2 weeks. This is the seller price reduction, almost everything at 100%. This is the buyer overbid. Buyer overbids are fairly common. You can see the frequency over here. About a third to 3/4 of the sellers are getting more than their asking price, but the amount overbid is nowhere where we were like in 2022 when those were like 18%. These are pretty much in the low hundreds, like 105 plus or minus a little bit. So we already just mentioned the frequency. Moving on to the appreciation. So now you can see the appreciation rates are different in the different areas, and this is since the last 9 months of 2015. And then finally we get to the sold price. I only have the median here. I am planning on adding in the 10 and 90 percentile pricing. So now we're looking at the seller asking price reductions, and what the purpose of these slides is to show what's happening in the marketplace without needing to wait for the escrow to close. So you simply look at how much the typical seller is reducing their asking price prior to the offer coming in. So what this says is 2.5% of the sellers are getting 88% of their asking price or less, but that means 97.5% are getting 88% of their price or more. And you can see very quickly we only get up here to 15%, and 85% of the sellers are getting 100% of their asking price. We start a year ago, and that's April 19th, 2022, and that's right up here. You can see the blue dotted lines right up here at the very top of the graph. The best week we ever had was February 14th of 2022, where everybody was also getting 100%. So getting 100% does happen. It doesn't happen that often. It happened sort of basically Valentine's Day of 2022, and it's happening in April 19th, which is not that many months later of 2022, but it did not happen all the time in between. The reason I picked the February date was the reduction was greater in 24/19/22. It was less on Valentine's Day, which is why it won out. And then what we do is we step forward each week, and as you come down and to the right, the market's getting worse. The dashed line is the worst week we ever had, which was just 4 months ago, December 27, 2022, except if you do go back to like January of 2008, the line's way down here, so it's almost completely off the graph. And we'll just step through and let the machine go. So now you can see it's stepping down, a big jump down, another weak jump down, another jump down. Now it's a little bit of a jump up. I call it a plateau. Now it's really just drifting back to where it was, a big jump down. And now it's a plateau, and now it's starting to increase. And so that allows you to see what the market is doing week to week without having to wait the 5 weeks for escrows to close. Another plateau, a jump up, and then another little plateau, another jump up, and now a week plateau is also. Okay, so now that was the seller side reducing their asking price before the offers come in. How big is it at the time the offers come in? Now we're looking at what the buyers are actually doing when they're making their bids on the offer. How much above asking price are they going in order to try to secure? The worst week we ever had was back with World Trade Center, November 30th of 2001, which was this blue dashed line here. The best week we ever had was just March 29th of 2022. Again, if you think about the average escrow being 5 weeks, March 29, 2022 aligns fairly well with that April 14th, 2022 being the best on the list price reductions. The concept's the same, but now as you go up and to the right, you're improving. As you go down and to the left, you're getting worse. There you can see you step down, another step down, 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 smaller down, plateau, several month plateau actually. Now another step down, plateau, and now we're on each week. So now you can see it slowly starting to march up. There's the first one I called an up, there's another. And some of these upward trends are fairly small. I think the buyers are being cautious and the magnitude of their overbidding is greatly reduced. Okay, so what we've been talking about is Silicon Valley real estate market geographically and graphically, week number 15. The green is what I call my root URL. That's how you get to the archives on YouTube. If you add in the purple suffix 2023, you get to the presentation Saturday morning at 5. If you add the suffix of H 2023-04-15, you get today's handout. I think it's 58 pages. It's the bulk of the handout. I don't do the slides where it's just on doing the different, like the movies. I don't do every slide of the movies. And then if you want a specific episode going forward at this time, you can ask questions as we go, just interrupt and we'll proceed. So now what we're doing is looking at inventory, and we're looking at inventory for the last 5 years. I do have 10 years worth of data, but I think it's better to have the x-axis spread out a little bit so you can start seeing some of the minute fluctuations that we have. The thin red line is going to be the hottest 10% for whatever the metric is we're looking at. The thin gray line is going to be the median for that metric over 10 years. And then the blue line is going to be the coolest 90 percentile for that given marketplace. And the reason I feel I only need to go back 5 years on this is the 3 lines we just discussed, the red, the gray, and the blue, show you what the long-term pattern is. And the purple is the actual data. You can see at the beginning part of the year, we were basically having a very typical level of inventory. But what's been unusual about this year is we really haven't been growing. We got up here maybe to February 1st, and the inventory really hasn't grown at a time when the inventory is normally, this is the gray lines, what you'd expect the market to be doing, is typically growing quite a bit. The dip this last week was because of Easter, so I do expect it to start drifting up, and I would expect it to start drifting up more because you'd expect it to be up here. It clearly isn't there. For whatever reason, sellers are not putting their house on the marketplace. It's more a lack of inventory than anything, but we also have a strong lack of offers. So we're having sort of the least inventory out of the last 10 years that you'd expect to have. Now we're looking at the offers, and it's the same thing. The worst offers we ever had were down here, and remember we had the pandemic, and we'll see that in a table form a little bit later, and we're basically just barely outproducing the pandemic. We're having essentially the least number of offers that you would expect. You'd expect offers to be way up here somewhere around 2,800 offers, and you're down here somewhere around 1,700. 1,700 to 2,800, that's 1,100 homes missing. That's, a third of the marketplace or so that's missing. A lot less transactions happening. This is days of unsold inventory. Because the lack of inventory combines with the lack of offers, we're having exactly the typical fast-paced marketplace that Silicon Valley has. Your days of unsold inventory is right at the median, right where you'd expect it to be. This is the 75th percentile of the days on marketplace, and it's sort of interesting. With days on market being typical, you'd expect the days on market to be typical. It's actually one of the slowest marketplaces. So what it's saying is you have more sellers that are spending time on the marketplace. So there's more sellers that are saying, I want the price back that the market reached back in 2022, and they're not selling, and they have to get realistic, or they simply don't sell. And since we're looking at days on the market, other offers accepted, these are the sellers that took time to get realistic, and then they were successful, because that's the only data that goes into this. Basically, the long typical seller is taking longer than you would expect, but still you're only talking about 21 days. And to sell a property in 3 weeks is a pretty fast-paced proposition. This is the largest price reduction. So this is the sellers reducing their price before the offers come in. And again, you'd expect it to be up here where the gray line is. In the typical the 10 percentile, sort of essentially the second worst year we've had, was up here at around 90%. And here we are this year at something like 89%. So only 1% differential. But the real key is you can see consistently since basically last July 1st, we've been below where sellers are actually taking more price reductions. They're getting a lower percent of their initial asking price since July of 2022 than they have over the last 10 years. Here's the average price reduction. And again, you can see we're below where you'd expect to be now. You've been below since, again, each vertical line, gray line, is a quarter. So this line here happens to be July 1st. So basically, since July 1st of 2022, sellers have been taking larger price reductions on average than they've had over the last 10 years. Here's the frequency of sellers reducing their asking price. And you can see again at the beginning part of 2022, we were having the least amount of reductions. We were having the hottest marketplace. We rapidly, right around this, it's probably something like, it's after April 1st, it's probably around May 10th, something like that, to something like August 1st. Man, it was just going straight up. Then we had a little bit of an improvement, started slowing down again. But once we got to the beginning part of this 2023, it's done nothing but improved. But again, it's been improving right on top of the blue line, which is the worst you'd expect it to be. Again, you'd expect it to be down here. So you'd expect something like the frequency of reduced price to be somewhere around 7.5%. But yet in today's marketplace, something approaching 13.5% of the sellers are reducing their asking price. Not a large number, but I think this is a good indication of what's happening because you don't have to wait for those escrows to close. This is now shifting gears, and we're now dealing overbidding. To get the overbid, we need the sale price, so we have to wait for escrows to close. And so you can see the median overbid is at 2% above the seller's asking price. So half the buyers that are right now closing in the last 5 weeks, half bid more than 2% above asking price, half bid less than 2% above asking price. So in another way of looking at it, sellers should basically have been asking 2% higher on all their pricing, but real estate is pretty weird where it's really price sensitive. And so I firmly believe that the best pricing strategy is to be just like 1% below the market value, whatever that is, which is why the overbid is happening. And you can see that in Silicon Valley, if you price your property correctly, buyers are willing to overbid. Now we change from median to average. So even though the median was only 2%, the average overbid's up here around 5%. What does that tell you? That tells you that when a buyer overbids, they overbid by large numbers because, half is down at 2%, but the average is up at 5%, which means you didn't have a lot of 20%, so a lot of 25%, a lot of 15% overbidding to pull up the ones that are at 1, 2, 3%. Here's the frequency overbidding. So right now, even though we're sort of in a cool marketplace, 60% of the sellers in Silicon Valley, which is Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, Alameda counties, are getting above their asking price. So that's approaching 2/3, or 3 out of 5 sellers are getting more than their asking price. You'd actually expect that to be up almost at 75%. The best we were was up here approaching 83%. Here's sold price on log graph. The straight up line is my best guess, and I should try to calculate that. For the time being, you can see that this is sort of where you'd expect pricing to be. You can see pricing was quite a bit lower at the beginning part of the year, but since the first of the year, it's really come up. It's almost catching up to the straight predicting line of where you'd expect the price to be. Basically, the slope of this straight thin blue line is the annual percent appreciation. I have pointed it out, but notice that at the beginning part of every year, at the end of every year, you have this downward pressure on price. That is isn't really property values, in my opinion. It's market mix, and it may have to do with the speed of the marketplace and things like that. Basically, real estate is an optional event. Anytime you have a disruption, whether it be Easter, whether it be the end of the year holidays, whether it be 4th of July, it negatively impacts real estate. There are two exceptions. Valentine's Day and Mother's Day have a slight positive impact. So as sentimental as that is, it appears that more buyers will purchase for those holidays versus less. Here's the active inventory for the 3 counties. So now we're shifting from Silicon Valley to looking at the components that make up Silicon Valley. So in the blue, you have Santa Clara County. In the orange, you have San Mateo County, and in the gray, you have Alameda County. I probably will come back and try to look at this point right here in San Mateo County. It's pretty unusual to have the active listings jump so high up and then right back down. Something might have gone wrong. Offers accepted. This is the flip side. And the big takeaway is you can see normally in Santa Clara County and Alameda County, which are the 2 big counties out of the 3, are typically somewhere around 1,200 homes selling. And we're down here somewhere around 750 maybe. So there's quite a bit of properties that should be selling that aren't selling. And if you want to be more accurate, you're just past the first vertical thin gray line. The thick gray line is the January 1st. So the first one is going to be April the 1st. You can come back here and pick each year. Now 2020 was low because of the pandemic, but again, you can see maybe my 1,200 was a little high and maybe it's closer to 1,100, but still going from 1,100 to some number around 750, you're missing something like 350 transactions. So you're missing almost a third of the volume of the marketplace. Here's days of unsold inventory. You can see Alameda County and Santa Clara County are right on top of one another. Down here around 27 days of unsold inventory. Pretty aggressive marketplace. I consider 40 to 80 be a balanced marketplace, and anything under 40 to be a seller's marketplace, and to be at 27 is still clearly a seller's marketplace. And that's based on speed, that's based on overbidding and things like that. But prices still are not going up, and you can't really push the price limit upwards. If you look at San Mateo County, it's doing the least well in a lot of benchmarks, and its days of unsold inventory is around 40. So it's essentially a balanced marketplace. But I think what you're really going to see when you look at the San Mateo County is you're going to see areas like the expensive areas in Menlo Park and Atherton, and also the coast doing poorly where the rest is doing well. But it depends on what benchmark you're talking about, because if you're talking about appreciation, the whole San Mateo County is doing poorly because of the dynamics of the marketplace. With remote working, people are moving away from the centers of workplace. Here's the 75th percentile of days on the market, much closer together, but Santa Clara County is the fastest, followed by Alameda County, and the slowest is San Mateo County. Again, you're on below 20, and then the only one that's above 20 days is San Mateo County. So San Mateo County is probably taking about 24 days, and Santa Clara County is probably taking about 14 days, and Alameda County is probably somewhere around 16, 17 days. This is the magnitude of price reductions on average. I did delete one data point for San Mateo County, which is why there's a gap here that isn't drawn together, because it was way out. I couldn't see anything wrong with my data, but it just didn't make sense. So I deleted the day. I will try to go back and find what's wrong, because it's nice to know that you're close to being, most of your data you put out is accurate. There is always going to be little mistakes out there, little errors. A lot of this is run by macros. So if your formulas are wrong and it's hard to catch. So if anyone noticed that it's anything that's suspicious, please bring it to my attention, because I'm sure there's still some data errors in here. Here's the magnitude of overbidding for the 3 counties. And again, you can see San Mateo County and Santa Clara County are right on top of one another. So that's a little bit of a surprise, but they're the least well. And so I guess really what we're saying is Alameda County is pulling away. The more affordable areas, a little bit more travel time with remote working becomes a little more popular, but they're getting about 7.5% on average above their asking price, where Santa Clara County and San Mateo County are getting about 103.5%. That's a pretty significant difference. If you look at it, it's only 4 percentage points, but it's more than doubling. If you look at 3.5 to 7.5, that's more than double above the 100% that they're asking. This is the frequency of overbidding. San Mateo County is the least well doing, but it's still at 50%. So essentially half the sellers sellers in San Mateo County are getting more than their asking price. In Santa Clara County, you're probably at 59%. And in Alameda County, the highest, you're probably about 67, 68%. Here's price on log paper, and the horizontal line is to sort of give you some reference point. So Alameda County is basically real close to 1.2 million. So if you come back, it's below the value it was in 2021. It's plateau. If you come up to Santa Clara County is actually above that same plateau in 2021. If you go back just to 2021, it's sort of interesting that one county is above and one county is below. And if you look at San Mateo County, because it's a smaller county, it's got a lot more fluctuation. So there really wasn't a flat spot in 2021, but I would clearly say it's below, and it's probably below by more than Alameda County is below. So again, it would be looking at this on a sold price, which would be appreciation. The best county is Santa Clara County, basically breaking even, maybe up a little bit. Alameda County being down some, and then San Mateo County appearing to be down a little bit more. Here's the same information, but this is on regular analog paper for those that prefer. I actually prefer log. And this is your appreciation using the last 9 months of 2015 as the base years. You can see that San Mateo County has the worst appreciation over that entire period of time. It is interesting on how close all the areas were. You come up to the pandemic right here, basically April 1st, and shortly after that, by when remote working started to happen, people went back to work the fourth quarter of 2020. You can see San Mateo County started to be least well appreciation and got more significant that way as we went on in time. And right now it's doing the least well down here, but still, you have 60% appreciation in just 8 years. I think that's pretty good, especially because you typically buy a house and you're leveraged out. Alameda County is next, somewhere around 62% appreciation, and doing the best is Santa Clara County at about 78% appreciation since 2015. This is the table format of the data. So this is the actual data that was plotted, or some of the actual data that was plotted. You can see that we had way more, 24% more new listings come on the market in the 3 counties. And the reason for that is not that we're getting flooded with new listings this week, but last week was artificially low. People don't put their house on the market going into a holiday weekend. So this was a week ago Friday. This was this past Friday. So now you're past the holidays. So the sellers are coming back on the marketplace, which is why we have so much new inventory coming on the marketplace. Inventory overall went up, not as dramatically as new listings, but that's because you have the holdover. And then the number of offers accepted was down because you had Easter. Buyers don't take as much of a holiday as sellers do, so you tend to eat into your inventory a little bit, which is what you see. And that's why the number of offers accepted really didn't change that much. This week, with all the influx of new listings, I'd expect the numbers for next week to jump up on the number of offers. So next week, I'd expect these offers accepted to be increased fairly significantly. You can see DUI is fairly consistent. It's jumped up again, and that's not, again, that's the holiday impact. It's the fact that more buyers would have bought if there was more inventory for them to buy, if there was more new inventory for them to buy, but without new inventory to buy, buyers went out last week and were disappointed. Then you get down to the closings information here, median days on market, average days on market, the 75th percentile. Most of them people talk about the average days on market. I've always been a fan of the median. I'm now a fan of the 75th percentile because it tells you what's going on with the marketplace a little bit, and there's a difference here, 11 days for the median, both Alameda County and in San Mateo County, but seeing that it takes 27 days for the 75th percentile versus 21 days in the 75th percentile, or, the other way, look at 8 days for the median versus 11 days, and then 18 versus 21 or 27. Statisticians do quadrants, 25 percentile, 50 percentile, which is the median, and 75th percentile. So I'm taking what I think is the most relevant quadrant, and then when the data doesn't allow quadrant analysis, like on price reductions, because believe it or not, 25% of sellers rarely take price reductions, I push that out to whatever the number I have to push it out to get data that's meaningful, which is why I look at the 90 percentile for price reductions. You can see the frequency and overbidding. You can see the average median overbidding in the different counties, and then the the sale price and the percent appreciation. Percent appreciation is interesting to see the difference between 2015 and 2020. There's a little bit of difference, especially in San Mateo County. In San Mateo County, there's only been 15% appreciation since 2020, which is showing that since the pandemic, it really hasn't done well, but there's 61% appreciation since 2015. Or another way to look at it is the differential between Alameda and San Mateo since 2015 is pretty minimal, but yet since 2020, since the pandemic, it's becomes more significant at 6% here, so most of the reduction has happened since the pandemic. And that's the kind of thing that I would normally argue is that I would expect all areas to appreciate at the same rate unless something comes in and disrupts the marketplace. Here we're looking at Silicon Valley single family homes only, because I only have that data going back for 25 years. We're normally looking at this data on May the 6th of each year because there's 30 days in April. I need 5 more days to get to 35 days, and then I get the data in the morning of the day after that. So I need the 5th for data. So on the 6th, I get data. Here, we're not to May 6, 2023 yet. This is data through the 15th, which was basically through Friday last night, and then you're comparing. And there's a few noteworthy things. Notice that the median asking price is $2 million, up from $1.8 million last year. The asking price is up to $200,000 or 10%, but what's selling is basically dead even, and the close price is down $200,000. One of the things that I had a consumer argue with me, and I don't think I ever convinced them, what this is saying is not that the typical seller is taking a $300,000 price reduction on their property, because that's simply not what's happening. What's on the market is a different mix of what's selling, and you can see that in a lot of ways. What's on the market is 2,000 square feet. What's selling is 1,750 square feet. This is asking price here too, because we don't have the sold price of offers accepted. What's on the market and not selling is 2 million. So you can see the lower end being under 2 million is selling more. It's different sets. When you're doing statistics, you have a set that you do your analysis on. And so the set that I'm doing the analysis on for what's on the market is a different set of properties for the offers that were accepted in the last week, which is a different set of data than the offers that closed in the last 5 weeks. Jump all the way down to close, 60% of the sellers overbidding. For this time of the year, in the last couple of years, that's been a pretty low number. If you go back to 2020, 2019, 2018, even early 20 teens, it becomes a more reasonable number of expectations. The magnitude of overbidding is a little bit on the low side, but that's fairly typical. When the buyers get insulted with a price reduction in the marketplace, they're more conservative. So they're still conservative and they're overbidding, only doing 3.5%. Yes, there was 1 year here in 2019 when it was only 2%, but even if you come back here to 2020, or the teens, it was around 5, 6, 8%. So the magnitude of overbidding was quite a bit greater, even though the frequency of overbidding was similar. So it just gives you an idea, allows you to compare sort of apples and apples. Again, this isn't apples and apples for the month of April because we are not to May 5th yet. So here's the honest comparison, but the reason I don't like this table is it's looking in the rearview mirror. We're looking at stuff that happened a whole month ago plus the time to close. This slide is worth talking about. This is the number of offers accepted, and the big takeaway, and I'm not trying to play statistics. I'm trying to present things honestly. With the pandemic, here's the numbers down here. So the first box would have been 1760. This box would have been 1530. This box here for the past week. Notice this says April the 19th. When anytime you have a date in the future, it's really Friday's date. I just don't want to have to go back and update all the dates that are on there. But you can see the number of offers accepted was declining. At no other year was it doing that. And that's because of shelter in place with the pandemic. So I deleted the data so you can see that the market's still doing relatively poorly compared to normal years, but you can see that it's only the 9th worst year out of the last 10, and it's only the 24th year out of the last 25. So I want to be real clear that 2020 had fewer offers accepted, but I wanted to get this 71% calculated by Microsoft Excel because I think that's meaningful. Because if I put these numbers in, these numbers now would be above 100%, and that's really not what I think the market's doing. That's what I think I'm going to do going forward, making it clear that we're not having the worst year anymore. We're having the second worst year, but the only year that we were having that was worse was the pandemic. And we don't have to do that for too long because by June, the number of offers coming back in 2020 was actually superheated, and I can feel comfortable putting it back in because these percentages will not be impacted dramatically. Here's looking at the inventory, the percent of inventory compared to where you normally expect it to be. You can see that we only have 60%, 62% of the inventory in that you want. Offers accepted are down here, so it's a little bit lower, maybe at 61%, but as a result, your DUI is right up here at 100% of where you'd expect it to be. Speed of the marketplace is exactly where you'd expect it to be. We've gone over this slide once. It basically shows you each of the micro market areas in Silicon Valley, lets you to give a summary of the different market conditions across that micro market area. And we've talked about this, the root URL, the green and the purple at suffixes, so I'll skip on that. And again, if you have questions, let me know. Now we're shifting from Silicon Valley to the Greater Bay Area. We're now on slide number 88 next. And the slide number is down in the lower right corner here, and you should be able to find that on almost every slide. A few slides, because the way I do produce the slide, it gets overridden, but this allows you to get to the slides that are interesting for you. The order of the slides should be the same from week to week. The exact number will change depending on what I'm doing. We've gone through 85 slides. Now we're going to add in a total of 13 counties, 3 in Silicon Valley, 2 in the cities, San Francisco and Marin, 4 in the North Bay, 2 in the Central Valley, and 2 in the Central Coast. We're going in sort of in the reverse order. We're going to start off with the data. So here's the data that we're going to see. And just for disclosure purposes, my list price average is copied from last week. Something went wrong in the processing, and those numbers all showed up as 0. So I'll have to correct that for next week, hopefully. And from last week to this week isn't really that big of a deal because it did correctly overwrite the data as of Wednesday. That's my March 1st dates multiples. So really this data is only for the average list price reduction is only 3 days old. Here's your active inventory. So you can see the areas that are the smallest. So San Francisco and the Central Coast are the 2 smallest county or the 2 smallest regions. Silicon Valley, North Bay, and the Central Valley are really close together as far as volume of inventory. But just look at the Central Valley and the North Bay. They were typically up here just shy of 5,000, even call it 4,000. Now you're short, you're maybe 1,500. So you only have 1/3 the inventory in those 2 large regions that you normally have. Silicon Valley is down, but not as dramatic, because it's the same number. So call this 1,500, and its typical is somewhere right around 2,500. So it's off 1,000. So it's off by about 25% if I'm doing my math quickly on the fly. Here's your offers accepted. Again, your Central Coast and the cities are smaller counties, and so they're down here. They're a little bit lower than the 480, 500 that you would sort of expect, but look at the other 3 counties. They're all compared very close together now. Back here, Silicon Valley would have been doing the most. So the lack of inventory or lack of offers appears to be hitting Silicon Valley more than the outlying areas, more than Central Valley and more than the North Bay. Here's days of unsold inventory. Here's where size no longer matters because you're doing a ratio. If you're a small county or a small region, you're going to have less inventory. You're going to also have less offers, bringing days of unsold inventory back in line. So the slowest areas over here are the blue, the Central Coast, followed by the cities, San Francisco and Marin, and then the remaining 3, Silicon Valley, the Central Valley, and the North Bay are all down here very close together and somewhere around 25 days of unsold inventory. Very fast-paced marketplace. Here's the 75th percentile. Again, this is the number I'm starting to like a lot. You can see Silicon Valley is doing the best, followed by the cities, followed by the Central Coast, and you can see the Central Valley up here, and the North Bay gets lost in here, the gray line. I think the gray line is right up here with the blue line, but it's just hard to see. I'm going to have to try to make it more visible. Here's your median days on market, and that part of the reason I think the gray line was up here there is because it's noticeable sneaking out here behind the yellow, and obviously the highest. So Silicon Valley again is doing the best, followed by the Central Coast, followed by San Francisco and Marin, followed by Central Valley, and then followed by North Bay. Here's the largest discounts, again, fairly close together. Discounts are only from, something like 86% to 88%. And remember, this is the 10%, so a very small portion of the marketplace of the sellers that are taking the biggest price reductions. What is the average of that 10 percentile? It sounds like I'm trying to skew the numbers, but if I looked at the 75th percentile, these would all be at 100%. And that's why I picked the 90% or the 10 percentile reduction. Here's the average. So, here you get back to more normal benchmarks. So the average price reduction for Silicon Valley is somewhere around 99.25%. You can see the worst county is doing like 98.5%. And I think that would start registering in anyone's head if they thought about it. If the average is only down 1.5%, the median is a smaller number and it becomes insignificant. And that's again why I do the 90 percentile on that number. Here's the overbid. This is the average overbid. Few buyers really overbidding on a property bring that number way up. You can see that the Central Coast is doing the least well. Here's the median, so that's the midpoint where half are doing better and half are doing worse. This is the smallest overbid, so this gives you an idea of the price reduction. So what the buyers are offering in the Central Coast area is 7% below the asking price. So it's real rare to get a property, an offer more than 7% below. In the other counties, it's up here around 5% below the asking price. This is the largest overbid, so you can see the overbids are coming up to around 22% above asking price for the cities, around 18% for the Silicon Valley. And this is the frequency of overbidding, ranging from 65% down to 30%. And that's the appreciation for the different area. You can see San Mateo County really lagging behind. And with that, I'm to the summary slide. So if you have any questions, if I don't have any questions, I'll see everybody next week. Take care. Bye for now.